Barton Hale, my wife's father, stood at the head of the long dinner table with a glass of sweet tea in his hand and said, "A man who joins a family should know when it's time to give back." Everyone looked at me. My wife, Kara, sat beside me with her hands folded in her lap. She did not look shocked. She did not look confused. She looked ready. That was when I knew this dinner was not really a retirement dinner. It was a trap. Barton smiled at the room like he was giving a toast. His white shirt was pressed, his gray hair was combed back. Behind him, the banner said, "Happy Retirement, Barton." There were balloons tied to the chairs, a sheet cake on a side table, and almost 30 people packed into a private room behind his favorite steakhouse in Tulsa. Family, friends, people from church, a few cousins I had only met twice. And all of them were waiting for me to answer a question Barton had not fully asked yet. He turned his glass in his hand and said, "Trevor has done well for himself. Nobody here can deny that." A few people nodded. I kept my eyes on him. "My name is Trevor Smith. I was 41, and I owned a small electrical repair company. Nothing fancy. 3 vans, 5 employees, and a shop with 1 bathroom that always smelled like copper wire and coffee. I had built it 1 service call at a time. I was not rich, but I was careful. Kara and I had been married for 9 years. For most of those years, I thought we understood each other. That night showed me I had been wrong. Barton looked down the table and said, "Sometimes a family has to pull together before everything falls apart." My stomach tightened. Kara's fingers touched my knee under the table. At first I thought she was nervous. Then she squeezed once, sharp and quick, like a warning. Barton kept going. "The store needs help," he said. "Temporary help. A bridge. I'm not asking for charity." His used appliance store had been open for almost 30 years. Washers, dryers, old refrigerators, repaired stoves. He used to be proud of that place. The sign out front said, "Hale Home Appliances," though half the bulbs had been out for months. I had fixed his wiring, twice, free both times. He never thanked me in front of anyone. I leaned back in my chair and asked, "How much help are you talking about?" Barton looked around the room first. He wanted witnesses. Then he said, $185,000 by Friday. No one breathed for a second. A fork touched a plate somewhere near the other end of the table. I looked at Kara. She stared at the centerpiece like the fake flowers had suddenly become interesting. I asked, "Did you know about this?" She did not answer. Barton gave a small laugh. "Don't put her on the spot." "She's my wife," I said. "If someone is asking me for $185,000, I think she's already on the spot." Kara's jaw tightened. Then she looked at me and said, "My dad gave me everything. Maybe it's time you stopped acting like my family is a burden." That line landed exactly the way she meant it to. People shifted. Someone whispered. Barton lowered his chin like a judge listening to a guilty man explain himself. I felt heat rise in my neck, but I kept my voice calm. I'm not signing over money at a dinner table. Barton smiled, but only a little. "This isn't just money," he said. "This is family." "No," I said. "This is a business request." Kara leaned toward me. "You're embarrassing me." That was the first honest thing she said all night. Not because I was wrong, because I was not following the script. Barton set his glass down. "Then maybe Kara needs to come home until you learn what family means," he said. The room went quiet in that heavy way people get quiet when they want drama but do not want to admit they are watching it. I looked at Kara again. She did not defend me. She did not tell her father to stop. She did not say, "Dad, this is private." She looked down at her lap and waited. That silence said more than a speech. Barton leaned both hands on the table. "Fund my business," he said, "or lose my daughter." I looked at him. Then I looked at my wife. And I said, "Pack her bags." The room froze. Kara's head snapped toward me. Barton blinked once, like he had heard me wrong. "What did you say?" he asked. I kept my voice even. I said, "Pack her bags." The strange thing was, I did not feel powerful when I said it. I felt tired in a deep place, like something inside me had been carrying weight for so long that it finally set it down without asking permission. Kara pushed her chair back. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said. Aunt Denise, Kara's mother, put one hand over her mouth. She was sitting near Barton, wearing a blue dress and a pearl necklace. She had spent most of the night smiling too hard. Now her smile was gone. Barton pointed at me. "You hear that?" he said to the room. "That's the man she married, cold as a bank vault." Kara stood up so fast her chair legs scraped the floor. "You really want me to leave?" I looked at her coat hanging over the back of her chair. I looked at her purse on the floor. Then I looked toward the small service hallway that led to the back door. "Kara," I said, "you already packed." The room shifted. Her face changed. It was small, just a flash around her eyes, but I saw it. Barton laughed. "What kind of nonsense is that?" I turned slightly so everyone could hear me. "The blue suitcase is in her trunk." Kara whispered, "Trevor." I kept going. "I saw it when I carried the dessert trays in from the parking lot. It was sitting right there in the back of your car, open enough for me to see the clothes folded inside." Nobody spoke. A man near the door leaned back in his chair to look at Kara's purse, like the suitcase might somehow be there too. Kara tried to smile, but it came out thin. "It's just some things for donation." "At a retirement dinner?" She looked at Barton. That was the mistake. The whole room saw it. Barton stepped forward. "You went through her car?" "No," I said. "The trunk was open. You were standing beside it." He stopped, because he knew I was right. When Kara and I arrived, Barton had met us in the parking lot. He acted cheerful. He told me to help bring in the cake and dessert trays from the back of Kara's car. Kara had gone inside with her mother. Barton stood near me the whole time, talking too loudly about the weather, blocking the trunk with his body. At the time, I thought he was just annoying. Now I knew he was hiding the suitcase. Kara's voice dropped. "You're making this ugly." I looked at her. "No, Kara, I'm making it clear." Barton clapped his hands once, sharp enough that Denise jumped. "This is exactly what I mean," he said. "He turns every family moment into an attack." I almost laughed. Family moment? A man had just demanded $185,000 from me in front of 30 people, then used my wife as a bargaining chip. But I was the one attacking? That was Barton's gift. He could spill gasoline, light the match, and still point at someone when the room filled with smoke. He had been doing it since the first year I married Kara. At our first Thanksgiving together, he joked that I looked surprised to be eating real food because I grew up poor. When I bought my first work van, he said it was cute I was pretending to run a company. When Kara and I bought our house, he walked through the garage and said, "Well, it's a start." Every insult came wrapped in a chuckle. Every insult had an audience. For years, I swallowed it, because Kara always said the same thing. "That's just Dad." But that night, she was not explaining him. She was helping him. I reached inside my jacket pocket. Kara saw the movement and went still. Barton noticed, too. "What's that?" he asked. "A letter." "From who?" I unfolded it slowly. "From Red Plains Commercial Lending." The color left Kara's face. That was when I knew she understood exactly what was in my hand. 2 days before the dinner, I had been at my shop replacing a breaker panel on one of our service vans when my office phone rang. My assistant, Nora, called out from the front desk and said a lender wanted to verify company information. I thought it was a scam at first. Then I took the call. The woman on the line asked if I had authorized Hale Home Appliances to list Smith Electrical Repair as supporting collateral for a business line of credit. I remember standing there with a screwdriver in my hand, grease on my thumb, and a cold feeling moving through my chest. I told her no. She paused, then said, "Mr. Smith, I think you should request a copy of this application." So I did. Now I held that copy in front of Barton and Kara. I said, "Your loan application was denied yesterday." Barton's mouth opened, but no words came out. I looked around the room. You all were told I refused to help family. What Barton left out is that he already tried to use my business to get money without telling me. A low sound moved through the table. Denise turned to Barton. "What is he talking about?" Barton waved one hand. "It was paperwork, just paperwork." "It was my company," I said. Kara took one step toward me. "Trevor, this is private." That almost got me. For 9 years, every hard conversation had to be private when it made her family look bad. But when they wanted to shame me, privacy disappeared. I held up the letter. "No, this became public when your father used this room to corner me." Barton's face darkened. "You think one letter proves anything?" "It proves enough to start," I said. Then I read from it. The application listed my company as financial support. It included my tax return, my company insurance certificate, my business account summary, and a copy of my signature. I looked at Kara. Only one person in this room had access to all of that. Kara's eyes filled with tears. That used to work on me. I knew the first tear. I knew the way her voice softened right after. I knew the exact moment I would usually feel guilty and back down. But this time, the tears came too early. She said, "I was trying to help my dad." "You copied my signature?" "I didn't think he'd use it like that." Barton snapped, "Don't answer him." That told the room more than Kara did. Denise pushed back her chair slowly. "Barton." He turned on her. "Stay out of this." She flinched. I had seen that before, too. Barton was loud with everyone, but Denise had learned to fold herself small around him. At dinners, she corrected his plate before he asked. At the store, she worked the counter for free and called it helping. When he talked over her, she smiled like she had lost her place in a sentence. That night, for the first time, she did not smile. She said, "Did you use Trevor's company?" Barton rubbed his forehead. "I did what I had to do." The room changed again. That was the first crack. Before that, people had been watching me like I was the problem. Now, they looked at Barton like he was holding something rotten behind his back. One of Kara's uncles, Wayne, spoke from the far side of the table. "Barton, you told us Trevor had already agreed." I turned toward Wayne. There it was, another piece. Kara closed her eyes. Barton said, "I said he was considering it." Wayne shook his head. "No, you said he was putting money in by the end of the week." Murmurs spread around the room. I looked at Barton. "How many people did you tell that to?" He glared at me. I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket. Then I said, "That's still not the worst part." Kara whispered, "Please don't." I looked at her. That was the saddest moment of the whole night, because she did not say, "That isn't true." She said, "Please don't." Barton took a step toward me. "You need to watch your mouth." I did not move. "You wanted everyone here," I said, "so let's finish in front of everyone." His hand curled into a fist beside his leg, but he did not swing. Barton cared too much about looking like the victim. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a second paper. This one was folded twice. I had printed it at my office before I came to dinner. I almost left it in the truck. Part of me had hoped I would not need it. That was foolish. People like Barton did not stop at the edge. They pushed until someone fell. I opened the paper. 3 weeks ago, I said, the landlord sent a final notice to Hale Home Appliances. Denise stood slowly. "What notice?" Barton stared at me with hate in his eyes. I kept my voice calm. "The lease was terminated. The store was already done before tonight." Someone gasped. Denise gripped the back of her chair. "Barton, is that true?" He said nothing. I looked at Kara. "You knew?" She wiped her cheek. "I knew they were behind." That is not what I asked. She swallowed. Barton slammed his palm on the table. Plates jumped. A child near the back started crying, and his mother hurried him out into the hallway. "You don't know what it takes to keep a business alive," Barton said. I almost answered fast. I wanted to. Every nerve in me wanted to tell him I knew exactly what it took. I knew about late nights, broken equipment, unpaid invoices, and employees who still needed checks on Friday. But I did not give him the argument he wanted. Instead, I said, the $185,000 was not to save the store. Wayne leaned forward. Then what was it for? Barton looked at Wayne, then away. I pointed toward the far end of the table. It was to pay back private loans. The room went dead quiet. I said, "Wayne, he owes you $40,000. Wayne's face hardened. I turned slightly. "Marla, he owes you $25. A woman in a green blouse covered her mouth. "And Phil," I said, looking at another relative, "he owes you $30. Phil stood up. "You said that was for inventory." Barton's face had gone red. "It was for inventory," he said. "No," I said. "It was for payroll, rent, and old debt. You kept borrowing from relatives to cover the last person you borrowed from." Denise looked like someone had taken the floor from under her. "Barton," she said, barely above a whisper, "tell me he's lying." Barton looked at his wife, then at the table, then at me. He said nothing. And that silence did what my papers could not. It made every person in that room understand. This had never been about family. It had been about survival. Barton's image, Barton's pride, Barton needing me to become the villain so no one would ask why his business had already collapsed. Kara sat down slowly. For a moment, I thought she might finally say the truth. Instead, she looked at me with wet eyes and said, "So, you'd really let me leave over money?" That line was supposed to pull the room back to her. It almost did. A few people looked at me again, waiting to see if I would soften. I loved Kara. That was the part people forget in stories like this. They think the moment you find out someone betrayed you, love shuts off like a switch. It does not. Love stays there for a while, confused and bleeding, asking if there is a way to explain what just happened. I looked at my wife, and I still saw the woman I married. The woman who danced barefoot in our kitchen the first week we moved into our house. The woman who once sat beside me in the hospital when I burned my hand on a panel box. The woman who knew how I took my coffee and bought me thick socks every winter because my feet were always cold after work. But I also saw the suitcase, the copied signature, the silence, the way she let her father aim a whole room at me. I said, "No, Kara, I'm letting you leave because you helped your father turn our marriage into collateral." Nobody moved. Nobody defended her. That was the sound I remembered most, the lack of rescue. Kara looked around the room like she was searching for one person to say I had gone too far. Her eyes went to her mother first. Denise looked away. Then Kara looked at Barton. He was too busy staring at the papers in my hand like they were weapons. That was when Kara understood something she should have understood before dinner started. Her father had used her too. She was not his daughter in that moment. She was leverage. Barton broke the silence. "You think you're better than us because you have a few trucks and a shop?" I shook my head. "No, I think I'm responsible for the people who work for me. I think I'm responsible for the business I built. And I think my wife should have asked me before handing my life's work to her father." Kara whispered, "I thought you'd say no." "I would have." "Then what choice did I have?" That question told me everything. In her mind, my no was a problem to get around. My trust was a locked door. She had helped her father look for a window. I nodded once. "Then I guess you made your choice before I got here." Her face crumpled. For a second, the whole room felt smaller. The banner sagged a little behind Barton. The balloons tapped against the wall when the air conditioner kicked on. Someone's phone buzzed, but no one reached for it. Barton picked up his glass again, but his hand shook. "This family has always helped each other," he said. Wayne pushed his chair back. "No, Barton, we helped you. You lied to us." Marla stood next. "You told me Denise knew." Denise turned sharply. "Knew what?" Marla looked sick. "About the loan?" Denise's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She looked at Barton with a kind of quiet I had never seen from her before. "You borrowed from my sister and used my name?" Barton said, "I was going to fix it." "With Trevor's money?" she asked. He had no answer. That was the second crack. The first was the loan application. The second was Denise finally seeing her own marriage clearly. Kara walked to the coat rack with stiff steps. She grabbed her coat, then stopped. "Trevor," she said. I looked at her. "You don't have to do this." I almost asked her what this meant. Expose the lie? Protect my business? Let her leave? Stop pretending? Instead, I said, "Go get your suitcase." Her face twisted. "You're really sending me out there alone?" "No," I said. "You packed before you knew my answer. That means you already planned to leave alone." She stared at me like I had slapped her. I had not raised my voice once. That seemed to scare her more. She walked out of the room. The door swung shut behind her. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. Then Barton moved like he was going after her, but Denise stepped in front of him. "Sit down," she said. He stared at her. Nobody had talked to Barton like that all night. Maybe nobody had talked to him in years. He opened his mouth, but Denise raised one hand. I said, "Sit down." He sat. That was the moment the room finally turned all the way. Not because I forced it, because the truth had nowhere left to hide. I placed both papers on the table. "I'm leaving copies here," I said. "Anyone who gave Barton money should talk to him directly. I'm not part of it. My company is not part of it. My accounts are not part of it." Wayne reached for the papers first. Barton snapped, "Don't touch those." Wayne looked at him and said, "You don't get to tell me what not to touch after taking $40,000 from me." That shut Barton down. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. Denise looked at me with tired eyes. "Trevor," she said, "I'm sorry." I believed her. That made it worse somehow, because the apology came from the one person who had not caused the damage. I nodded. "I'm sorry too." Then I walked out. Kara was standing beside her car in the parking lot. The trunk was open. The blue suitcase sat inside, exactly where I had seen it earlier. The night air was cold enough to make my hands ache. She had her arms wrapped around herself. For a second, she looked younger, smaller, like the woman I used to know before her father's voice filled every room she stood in. She said, "I didn't think you'd actually let me go." I stopped a few feet away. "That's why you did it in front of everyone." She looked down. "I was scared for him." "I know. He's my dad. I know that too." She looked up at me. "Then why couldn't you help?" That question hurt because it sounded so simple. Help. As if help meant handing over $185,000 after she copied my documents. As if help meant letting Barton use my company as a bucket to catch water from his sinking boat. As if help meant smiling while they turned me into the selfish husband in front of a room full of people. I said, "Because helping someone doesn't mean letting them drag you under." She wiped her face. "I made a mistake." "No," I said. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. This was a plan." She started crying harder then. I wanted to comfort her. That old habit rose in me fast. Step closer, lower my voice, tell her we would talk at home. But home had already been brought into this. Our tax returns, my company papers, my signature, our marriage. So I stayed where I was. Kara whispered, "What happens now?" I looked at the suitcase. "You go where you plan to go." She waited for more. I had nothing else to give her. I got in my truck and drove away. The next morning, I went to my shop before sunrise. The office was dark except for the security light above the back door. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and stood there for a minute, listening to the quiet. That place had been built with every tired version of me. The version who worked weekends. The version who skipped vacations. The version who learned payroll software at midnight because I could not afford a bookkeeper yet. The version who smiled at customers who talked down to me because I needed the account. I thought about how close Barton had come to reaching into it. Then I changed every password. I called the bank and froze any shared access connected to my business accounts. I called my insurance agent. I called the lender and requested written confirmation that I had not approved Barton's application. Then I called a lawyer. I did not do it dramatically. I did it like maintenance. When a wire is damaged, you shut off power before the whole wall burns. Kara texted me 11 times that day. The first message said, "Can we talk?" The second said, "My dad didn't explain everything to me." The third said, "You humiliated me." That one told me she still did not understand. By evening, Barton had called twice. I did not answer. Denise called once. I answered her. Her voice sounded thin. "I found more papers," she said. I closed my eyes. She told me Barton had borrowed against equipment that was already leased. He had missed tax payments. He had told her the store was slow but stable. It had not been stable for a long time. 2 weeks later, Hale Home Appliances closed. There was no big scene, no dramatic sign on the door, just a printed notice taped to the glass and dark windows behind it. Kara stayed with her parents at first, then with a cousin, then in a short-term rental near her work. We met once in a lawyer's office. She looked tired. She apologized, but even then, part of her apology kept circling back to pressure, fear, and her father needing help. I listened. Then I asked one question. If I had said yes that night, would you have told me about the loan application? She looked down. That was my answer. The separation moved faster than I expected. Maybe because there was not much left to argue about. We did not have children. The house was mine before the marriage. The business was protected. She took her clothes, her car, and a few pieces of furniture her mother had given us. The blue suitcase disappeared with her. I thought seeing it gone would feel good. It did not. It just made the house quieter. People asked me later if I regretted saying it in front of everyone. I thought about that a lot. Part of me wished the truth had come out in a living room with the door closed. Part of me wished Kara had come to me before dinner, sat at our kitchen table, and told me the whole ugly thing with her own voice. But that was not what she chose. She chose the room. She chose the audience. She chose the pressure. All I did was refuse to play the part they wrote for me. I did not lose my wife because I refused to fund a business. I lost her the moment she decided my trust was less important than her father's pride. And when I think back to that dinner now, I do not remember the money first. I remember the silence after I said, "Pack her bags." I remember realizing that sometimes a marriage does not end when someone walks out. Sometimes it ends earlier, in the quiet second when they wait to see if public shame will make you cheaper than your own self-respect. If you've ever been forced to choose between keeping peace and keeping yourself, you know how heavy that silence can feel. Some doors close loudly, but the ones that change you usually close while everyone is watching, and you finally stop reaching for the handle.